Rick's voice cut through the phone like a knife dipped in ice. Either you pay that $1,500 fine by Friday, or we start foreclosure. The words echoed in my ear long after he hung up. My hands trembled as I stared at the stack of unpaid bills already spread across my kitchen counter. But this one felt different. This one wasn't about money. It was about control, about power. The letter had come 2 days earlier, stuffed into my mailbox like a threat. The HOA logo sat at the top, sharp and smug in black ink. Under it, bold red letters read, "Notice of violation." The description was vague, too vague. Property not in community appearance standards. That was it. No photos, no details, no explanation. I read it 5 times, trying to understand how my freshly mowed lawn, trimmed hedges, and white-painted fence could possibly be a violation. My stomach twisted tighter with each line. I had lived in this neighborhood for barely 8 months. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe, or so I thought. After years of working double shifts as a nurse, I'd finally bought a place for me and my 15-year-old daughter, Maya. The day we moved in, I remember telling her, "This is ours now, baby. No landlord, no rules, just peace." I didn't know that peace could be stolen with one envelope. At first, I assumed it was a mistake, maybe a clerical error. But when I walked down the block that afternoon, something inside me snapped. My next-door neighbor, a man who barely acknowledged me, had the same kind of porch decor, the same flower pots, except his weren't fined. Across the street, another home had chipped paint on its shutters. No violation notice there either. Everything looked identical. Everything except us. The air smelled of cut grass and fresh mulch, but there was something foul beneath it, the invisible stench of judgment. As I walked past, blinds shifted, curtains twitched, eyes watched. It wasn't paranoia, it was confirmation. I decided to confront them. The HOA office sat behind a small brick building near the entrance of the community. Inside, it smelled of old coffee and printer toner. Rick Dunlap, the HOA president, sat behind his desk like he owned the place. A thick gold watch gleamed on his wrist, and a smug half-smile played across his lips. "Good morning, Miss Carter," he said, dragging out my last name like it was something bitter on his tongue. "How can we help you today?" I placed the violation notice on his desk. "This," I said. "Can you tell me what exactly I did wrong?" Rick leaned back, eyes flicking over the paper. "Well," he began slowly, "we just try to keep things consistent. You understand? Uniformity keeps property values high." I frowned. "Uniformity? My house looks exactly like everyone else's." He smiled without warmth. "Not quite. Sometimes it's not about what you see, it's about what people feel when they drive through. We have a certain look to maintain." The way he said "feel" made my skin crawl. I could hear the unspoken part. People like you make others uncomfortable. My jaw tightened, my pulse pounding in my ears. "So this is about what I look like?" I asked quietly. Rick's grin widened. Now, let's not make this about race. It's just policy." I left before I said something that would get me arrested. The walk home felt longer than usual. Every step echoed with humiliation. I replayed the conversation over and over, trying to convince myself that maybe, somehow, I was wrong. But deep down, I knew exactly what was happening. I just didn't want to admit it. Not yet. That evening, I made dinner for Maya, pretending everything was fine. She talked about school while I forced a smile and nodded. After she went to bed, I sat on the couch, staring at that letter again. My fingers brushed the edge of the paper. It felt heavier now, like it carried the weight of something bigger than a fine. Around midnight, I heard a faint rustle outside. I froze. The sound came again, a soft scrape near the front door. My heart thudded against my ribs as I crept forward and switched on the porch light. There, taped to the center of my door, was a plain white sheet of paper. No letterhead, no signature, just 6 words scrawled in black marker. "People like you don't belong here." I stood there, barefoot, staring at the message as the porch light buzzed above me. For the first time since moving in, my home didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a warning. "Get off my property." The words exploded like a gunshot across the fence line. I froze, camera in hand, staring at my neighbor. Red-faced, veins bulging, fists clenched. I'd only asked one question: why he told the HOA I'd broken community standards. He didn't answer. He just shouted again, spitting fury into the air before slamming his door so hard the glass rattled. For a few seconds, all I could hear was the wind rustling through the oaks that lined the street. Then, slowly, the blinds from two nearby houses shifted. People were watching again, always watching. I lowered my phone and tried to swallow the lump rising in my throat. I wasn't in a neighborhood. I was in enemy territory. When I first found this house, it had felt like the American dream made real. 2 bedrooms, a small garden, and a quiet street where Maya could finally ride her bike without fear. I'd spent 10 years working double shifts as a nurse, saving every spare dollar. When I got the keys, I cried right there on the front porch. This was supposed to be the payoff for a decade of sacrifice. But now every time I looked around, all I could see were walls closing in. At first, the hostility was subtle. Whispers that trailed off when I passed. Fake smiles that vanished the second I turned away. The couple across the street always waved at other neighbors, but never me. When Maya played basketball in the driveway, someone called the HOA about noise. When I hosted my sister for dinner, another complaint appeared about too many visitors. Still, I tried to believe it wasn't personal. Maybe they were strict with everyone. But one afternoon, after Rick's phone threat still echoing in my head, I decided to check. I walked around the block and really looked. Mrs. Carpenter, 3 houses down, had garden statues lined across her yard, technically against HOA guidelines. No fines. The Petersons next door had peeling paint on their fence. No violation notice. Mr. Rogers's trash bins sat out for days at a time. Nothing. Every so-called rule I had been fined for was being ignored right in plain sight. And every one of them was white. That realization hit me like a gut punch. It wasn't about lawns or fences. It was about me. About my skin. The quiet hate that hid behind their manicured yards. That night, I pulled out my phone and began taking pictures. Evidence, dates, times. Every ignored violation got its own folder. I even bought a small notebook and started logging everything. Every fine, every conversation, every glance that didn't feel right. But the more I documented, the more obvious the double standard became. The HOA was weaponizing its rules, and I was the target. Days turned into weeks, and the tension only grew thicker. One morning while I was watering my plants, the mail carrier hesitated before handing me a new envelope. Another violation. Porch items not consistent with community design. It listed my hanging flower baskets, bright yellow daisies that Maya had planted for Mother's Day. I laughed bitterly. Consistent, I muttered. Consistent with what? White paint? White flowers? White families? That night, I sat in the living room scrolling through my growing archive of evidence. My fingers shook, but not from fear. This time from anger. I wasn't going to let them push me out quietly. That's when I stumbled upon something online that gave me hope. The Fair Housing Act of 1968. It said no one could be discriminated against in housing based on race, color, or national origin. Those words glowed on my phone screen like a lifeline. I read them again and again until they burned into my mind. Maybe the HOA thought they could bully me, but the law said otherwise. The next afternoon, I stepped outside with my phone, determined to collect more proof. I walked to the end of the block and snapped a photo of a neighbor's untrimmed hedge, then another of a driveway covered in oil stains. Everything they ignored for everyone else was going into my file. But as I knelt to take another picture, a door slammed open behind me. Rick stormed out, face flushed, jaw tight. "What do you think you're doing?" he barked. I straightened, heart pounding but voice steady, just gathering evidence. His eyes narrowed, "You're harassing residents, Danielle. If you keep this up, we'll have to take serious action." He stepped closer until I could smell the coffee on his breath. "You're not welcome here," he said low, almost whispering. For a moment, I felt my courage flicker, but only for a moment. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just my fight anymore. It was about every person who'd ever been told they didn't belong. Rick slammed the gavel so hard the sound cracked through the small community room. "This is not a courtroom, Miss Carter. This is my community." His voice bounced off the beige walls, loud enough to make the front row flinch. The fluorescent lights flickered above us, casting a harsh glare on the circle of folding chairs where 24 neighbors sat, most of them avoiding my eyes. My palms were damp, but I didn't back down. I had come here for fairness, not another lecture. The monthly HOA meeting was supposed to be open and orderly, a place where homeowners could appeal fines, raise issues, and seek resolution. I had come prepared. A binder full of photos, letters, and timestamps sat on my lap, the product of weeks of documenting every act of discrimination I could find. I'd rehearsed my statement 3 times before walking in, but from the moment I sat down, I knew I was walking into a setup. Rick sat at the head of the table like a judge, his gold watch catching the light every time he gestured. Beside him were the same 3 board members who had signed my fines, 2 middle-aged couples who barely glanced in my direction. They smiled and joked among themselves while I waited for my name to be called. "Next up," Rick announced, tapping his papers, "we have Danielle Carter, regarding violation appeal number 1742. He looked up slowly, eyes narrowing. Again, the room chuckled. I felt my face heat up, but I forced my voice to stay even. "Thank you, Mr. Dunlap. I've come to present evidence that the fines issued against me are discriminatory and inconsistent with HOA policy." Rick leaned back, arms folded. "Discriminatory?" he repeated, dragging out the word like it amused him. "Miss Carter, we treat everyone the same here." I opened my binder, flipping to the first page. Side-by-side photos of my porch decor and my neighbor's nearly identical setup. "Then why was I fined for these flower baskets when Mrs. Carpenter wasn't?" I asked. Before he could respond, one of the board members, a gray-haired woman in pearls, interrupted. "That's irrelevant. Each property is evaluated individually." I held up another photo. "What about this? Uncut hedges, no fine. Oil-stained driveway, no fine. You fine me for the same things." Rick waved a dismissive hand. "You're cherry-picking examples, and honestly, the tone you're taking right now is aggressive. We don't tolerate hostility here." I felt a ripple of laughter from the audience. Neighbors who'd watched me get singled out for months now smirking like it was entertainment. "Aggressive?" I said quietly. "I'm being calm. I just want an explanation." Rick slammed the gavel again. "You're out of line. This meeting is for appeals, not accusations." "But that's exactly what an appeal is," I said, standing up. My voice was shaking, but I refused to sit. "You fine me for things my white neighbors do every day, and you refuse to show me the bylaws. That's illegal." Rick's expression darkened. "Illegal? Miss Carter, you'd better watch what you're implying." "I'm implying that this board is abusing its power," I said. A man from the back row shouted, "Maybe you should just move if you don't like it here." A few others laughed. My throat tightened. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I looked down at the binder in my hands, my proof, my defense, and realized it didn't matter to them. They had already made up their minds. "Under HOA regulations," I said, forcing the words out, "homeowners have the right to appeal fines and present evidence. You're denying me that right." Rick smiled without humor. "We'll take your comments under advisement," he said, dismissively flipping through his papers. "So that's it?" I asked. "You won't even look at my evidence?" He didn't answer. He just raised the gavel again. "Meeting adjourned," he barked. The sharp crack echoed one last time. Chairs scraped. Conversation started up immediately. Snickers, murmurs, judgmental glances. I stood there, the last one still holding her ground, as Rick gathered his papers. He walked toward me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, cheap musk and arrogance. He leaned in so only I could hear. "You'll regret bringing this up," he whispered, lips curling into a smile. "You're making this a lot harder on yourself than it needs to be." I froze, not out of fear, but disbelief. Because now it was clear, it was never about fines, paint, or porch flowers. It was about making me feel small enough to leave. I walked out of that room with my binder clutched against my chest, the laughter of my neighbors echoing behind me. But what Rick didn't know was that every word, every insult, every denial of my rights, I was documenting it all. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. "Get out before we make you!" someone screamed, right before an egg exploded against my porch railing. I jumped back, heart pounding as another one hit the siding, splattering yellow yolk across my freshly painted wall. The laughter that followed came from somewhere in the shadows, a cruel, taunting echo that faded as fast as it came. I didn't see faces, just movement, just hate. I stood there barefoot on the porch, shaking, staring at the dripping mess. The night air smelled sour, heavy with the stench of rotten eggs and humiliation. My daughter Maya rushed out behind me, her voice trembling. "Mom, what happened?" I didn't have an answer. All I could say was, "Go back inside, baby, lock the door." It had been 2 weeks since that HOA meeting, the one where Rick publicly embarrassed me and told me I'd regret speaking up. He wasn't bluffing. Retaliation came fast. First, it was another letter in the mail. Then another. And another. Each stamped with the HOA logo like a signature of control. Violation, grass exceeding 2 inches. Violation, mailbox not matching community paint code. Violation, vehicle parked facing the wrong direction. It was endless. Some days, I'd get 2 in one envelope, both dated the same day. I kept them all in a folder, trying to stay calm, trying to remind myself that logic would win out eventually. But logic doesn't stand a chance against people who don't care about truth. One morning, I went outside to find my garbage bins knocked over, trash scattered across the driveway. Another day, someone poured motor oil near the edge of my lawn, killing the grass. Maya came home crying after someone at school told her, "Your mom's going to lose your house." It was like living under siege, but there were no police lines, no crime tape, just the invisible cage of social power. Sleep became a stranger. Every creak outside made my body tense. I started keeping the porch light on all night, double-checking locks, even though I knew that wouldn't stop the real danger. The harassment that hid behind HOA letters and fake smiles. Then came the next meeting notice, another disciplinary review. I didn't bother going. What was the point? I knew the result before it began. The same people would sit behind the same table, pretending fairness while drafting the next attack. Every fine had the same pattern: no proof, no photos, no inspections, just accusations. And always signed by Rick Dunlap. That's when I began researching something called selective enforcement. The term came up again and again in homeowner rights forums. It meant that if an HOA enforced rules against one homeowner but ignored others for the same violations, those fines could be invalidated under state law. The phrase gave me a strange kind of hope, like maybe finally I'd found a crack in their armor. But even knowing that, it didn't stop the fear. Maya stopped sleeping in her room after someone left a dead bird on our front step. She started keeping her backpack ready in case we had to leave suddenly. Watching her live in that constant state of fear made my chest ache in a way I can't describe. Neighbors we once waved to now avoided us entirely. When I drove by, curtains would shift just enough for me to see movement inside. One afternoon, I caught 2 residents standing near my mailbox, whispering. When they saw me, they crossed the street without saying a word. The isolation was complete. They wanted me to feel alone, outnumbered, defeated, but I refused to give them that satisfaction. I documented everything: the dates of each letter, the damage to my property, the late-night noises. My phone became my lifeline, my only defense. Every photo was evidence. Every word I wrote down was another step toward the truth. Still, nothing could prepare me for what I saw next. It was just after dawn. The air was cold, heavy with dew. I stepped outside, clutching my coffee mug, trying to breathe through the anxiety that had become my morning ritual. But when I looked toward the fence that bordered my yard, my hand froze midair. Across the wooden panels, in thick red spray paint, were three words that stole the breath from my lungs. Go back home. My knees nearly buckled. The mug slipped from my fingers and shattered on the concrete. For a long time, I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. The paint dripped slowly, glistening like blood in the morning light, and I realized something horrifying. This wasn't just about my house anymore. It was about who they thought had the right to live here at all. That was the moment I stopped feeling afraid. That was the moment I decided I wasn't going to run. Flashing red and blue lights cut through the dark, washing over my living room walls like a slow-moving storm. For a second, I thought maybe it was an ambulance passing through. But then came the pounding. 3 sharp, heavy knocks on the door. "Ma'am, step outside. We got a complaint." I froze, heart hammering in my chest. Maya appeared at the top of the stairs, eyes wide. "Mom, what's happening?" she whispered. I motioned for her to stay back. Every instinct told me not to open that door, but when I peeked through the blinds, I saw a police officer standing on my porch, hand resting casually on his belt. I took a slow breath and cracked the door open. "Officer, is something wrong?" He gave a polite nod. "Evening, ma'am. We received a noise complaint from one of your neighbors. Said there was yelling and loud music." I blinked at him, dumbfounded. "Noise? Officer, it's just me and my daughter here. She's been upstairs doing homework all night. We haven't even had the TV on." Before he could respond, a voice cut through the quiet from across the street. "That's her, officer. She's been shouting at people again." Rick Dunlap stood there, arms folded, a smug smirk plastered across his face. He was wearing his usual khaki shorts and an HOA polo, the picture of false authority. The porch light from his house cast a halo around him like he was performing for an audience. The officer frowned slightly. "Sir, are you the complainant?" Rick took a few steps closer. "I represent the HOA," he said proudly. "We've had ongoing issues with Miss Carter being disruptive. Several of our members have felt threatened by her behavior." My jaw clenched. "Threatened? For what? Asking questions?" Rick shrugged. "For yelling at neighbors, for taking pictures of their houses, for constantly violating community rules." That was it. I grabbed my phone off the counter, hit record, and held it steady in my hand. "Officer, I'd like to document this conversation." The officer looked at me, surprised. "You're recording?" "Yes," I said, keeping my voice calm. "This is my property, and under state law, I'm allowed to record any interaction I'm part of. It's called one-party consent." He nodded slowly, understanding. "You're right, ma'am. You can." Rick's smirk faltered just a little. "You can't just record people without permission," he barked. I met his glare. "Actually, I can. You should look up the law before you start making false claims." Again. For the first time, Rick didn't have a comeback. He turned to the officer. "You see? This is exactly what I mean, combative, disrespectful." The officer raised his hand, signaling him to stop. "Mr. Dunlap, that's enough. I haven't seen or heard anything disruptive here tonight." He turned back to me, his tone softening. "Ma'am, I believe you. But I'd suggest keeping this recording safe, and maybe documenting any future incidents. Something tells me this won't be the last time." He scribbled a few notes, gave a polite nod, and walked back to his cruiser. Rick lingered in the yard a moment longer, glaring at me before finally turning away. When the patrol car drove off, silence settled over the neighborhood. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it for a long moment, my heart still pounding. Maya crept down the stairs. "Are they gone?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "They're gone." She hesitated before asking, "Why do they hate us, Mom?" That question cut deeper than anything Rick could ever say. I pulled her into a hug, trying to steady my voice. Because some people can't stand seeing others live free. But we're not going anywhere, okay? She nodded, though I could see the fear still flickering in her eyes. After putting her to bed, I sat at the kitchen table and replayed the recording on my phone, making sure every word was clear. The officer's voice, Rick's accusations, my calm responses. It was all there. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that this wasn't paranoia. Legal nugget. Always know your state's recording laws. In many states, like mine, one-party consent allows you to legally record any conversation you're part of. Those recordings can become powerful evidence if someone tries to twist your words or weaponize lies against you. It was past midnight by the time I finally went upstairs. The house was still, the kind of stillness that's too quiet to trust. Just as I began to drift off, a faint click echoed from outside, then another. I got up, walked to the window, and peered through the blinds. The porch light was on, but the camera light, my little red security indicator, was dark. I checked the side camera. Dead. The back one. Dead. Every single one of my security cameras had been disabled. My stomach dropped as I realized someone had been here again. You picked the wrong homeowner to mess with. I muttered under my breath as I pinned another violation letter to the wall. The paper joined dozens of others already tacked up like battle scars. Each one stamped with that same HOA logo, each one signed by the same smug name, Rick Dunlap. My dining room had stopped looking like a home weeks ago. It was now a war room. The walls were covered in rows of letters, timelines, and photographs. On the table sat my laptop, a printer, stacks of folders, and color-coded sticky notes. If Rick wanted to turn my life into a battlefield, I was ready to fight with the only weapon I had. Proof. Every night after work, I sat there sorting through evidence. Violation letters on one side, comparison photos on the other. I highlighted dates, signatures, and wording. They all followed the same pattern. Vague accusations, no evidence, no inspection reports. It was a paper trail of discrimination, and I was connecting every dot. Maya helped me whenever she could. She'd sit across the table, her laptop open, scrolling through old HOA newsletters and neighborhood group posts. "Mom, look," she'd say, pointing at photos of community events. "See this? Mrs. Carpenter's porch had the same planters last summer." I leaned in. She was right. Identical flower baskets, same color, same height, but no violation for her. I took a screenshot and added it to the folder labeled Selective Enforcement. The deeper we dug, the uglier it got. There were neighbors who parked on the street overnight, painted their fences off color, even built unauthorized sheds, and the HOA ignored them all. The only difference between their violations and mine was the color of the person receiving them. The emotional toll was heavy. Every document reminded me of how they'd stripped away my peace one letter at a time. But with each piece of evidence I collected, something inside me hardened. I wasn't the scared woman from that first meeting anymore. I was a woman building a case. Late one night, as rain tapped against the window, I decided to test a theory. I opened my HOA's website and found a buried clause about homeowner rights of access. According to it, members could request to see all HOA financial, enforcement, and complaint records. It was buried deep, clearly something they hoped nobody would notice. I drafted a formal request email right then and there. "Dear Mr. Dunlap, as a homeowner in good standing, I am requesting access to the HOA's enforcement records and all meeting minutes referencing my property, per state homeowner association law and your own bylaws. Please provide copies within 10 business days. Respectfully, Danielle Carter." I sent it and waited. Days passed with no reply. Then one morning, an email appeared in my inbox. Not from Rick, but from the HOA's generic account. "We've received your request. Some records may not be available due to privacy concerns." I knew what that meant. They were hiding something. So I went further. I sent the same request certified through the county clerk's office, making it legally binding. That got their attention. A week later, a thick envelope arrived. I opened it cautiously, hands trembling with anticipation. Inside were copies of meeting minutes, complaint logs, and emails between board members. I spread them out across the table, scanning line after line until one phrase stopped me cold. It was from Rick's email address, sent to the board just a few days after I'd first moved in. "We can't let that house lower property values. The community expects us to maintain certain standards." I stared at it, reading the line over and over again until the words blurred. That house, not her property, not the address. That house. Maya came into the room, rubbing her eyes. "Mom? What's wrong?" I turned the paper toward her. She read it, then looked at me with wide, horrified eyes. "They really said that?" "Yeah," I whispered. "They did." Silence filled the room. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. The rain had stopped, but the storm was just beginning. For the first time in months, I felt something powerful rising in my chest. Not fear, not sadness, but clarity. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was discrimination. Documented, deliberate, undeniable. I gathered the papers, placed them neatly into a folder marked Evidence, Phase 2, and looked up at my wall of proof. The fight had officially changed. I wasn't defending myself anymore. I was preparing to expose them. They wanted war? They just got it. "This is blatant racial discrimination," Marcus said, his voice rising as he tossed the HOA's letter across his desk. The paper landed with a slap that echoed through his quiet office. "They actually put this in writing?" I nodded, sliding another folder toward him. Photos, emails, complaint logs, all color-coded and neatly labeled. My hands still trembled a little, even though I'd gone through the evidence a dozen times before coming here. I wasn't nervous about the facts. I was nervous about what would happen once someone powerful actually saw them. Marcus Langford was a tall, broad-shouldered man with calm eyes and a voice that carried weight. His office walls were lined with framed certificates and black and white photos of him in courtrooms. He'd handled civil rights cases for over 20 years, and he didn't shock easily. But as he flipped through my documents, his expression hardened. He picked up the copy of Rick's email, the one that said, "We can't let that house lower property values." He read it once, then again, jaw tightening with every word. "This right here," he said, tapping the page, "is enough to open a federal complaint." They just admitted bias in writing. Hearing him say that out loud made my stomach twist. For months I'd been gaslit, mocked, ignored. Every time I spoke up, someone told me I was overreacting. Now, finally, someone with authority was saying it wasn't in my head. Marcus leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "We're going to file under two statutes. The Fair Housing Act of 1968, which prohibits discrimination in housing, and Civil Rights Code Section 1982, which guarantees equal property rights regardless of race. Between the two, we'll have them cornered." I swallowed hard. "Will it be dangerous?" He studied me for a moment. "They're going to push back, Danielle. People like this always do. They'll call you names, they'll spread lies, maybe even try to intimidate you." He leaned forward. "But the law is on your side. What they've done is illegal, and we're going to prove it." Hearing those words, "the law is on your side," made something inside me crack. For months I'd felt powerless. Like my own home was a cage built out of rules and prejudice. But now, for the first time, I felt a flicker of strength. Marcus slid a few forms across the desk. "I'll file the complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development today. Once they review it, we'll move towards civil court." He paused. "Are you ready for that fight?" I looked down at the papers, then at my hands. My fingers were still stained with ink from organizing evidence the night before. I wasn't ready. Not really. But I also knew that if I didn't fight, Rick and his board would do this to the next family who moved in. "Yes," I said finally. "I'm ready." Marcus smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both reassurance and warning. "Good. Then let's make some noise." By the time I left his office, the afternoon sun had turned the parking lot into a mirror of heat. I sat in my car for a long minute, staring out at the road, trying to steady my breathing. Relief and dread swirled together in my chest, two sides of the same truth. I'd finally found help. But now I was officially going to war. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house made me sit up, half expecting headlights to flash through my window again. Maya could tell something had changed. She hugged me tighter before bed, whispering, "You're doing the right thing, Mom." I wanted to believe her. The next morning, the air was heavy with humidity. I opened the front door to grab the newspaper, and froze. There, taped right beside the handle, was a new envelope stamped with the HOA logo. My name was printed in bold black letters. I tore it open, my pulse thundering in my ears. It wasn't another fine, it was worse. Notice of foreclosure proceedings. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The paper slipped from my hand and fluttered to the porch floor. The words blurred through tears I hadn't realized were falling. They weren't just trying to silence me now. They were trying to take everything I owned. "We have proof she's dangerous," Rick shouted, his voice booming across the street as two local news cameras zoomed in. I stood on my porch, frozen in disbelief, clutching the foreclosure notice in my hand while reporters scribbled in their notepads. Rick looked like he'd been waiting for this moment. Clean polo, fake confidence, and a stack of papers he waved like gospel truth. "She's been harassing HOA members, threatening our board, and disturbing the peace," he declared to the cameras. Every word was a lie. Within hours, the HOA had posted official meeting minutes on their community website, claiming they'd held an emergency session to address my aggressive behavior. But I hadn't been there, because the meeting never happened. They'd faked everything. Marcus and I sat in his office the next morning, both of us staring at the printouts. "They're desperate," he muttered, flipping through the pages. "These minutes are doctored. Half the signatures don't even match." He was right. Dates didn't line up. Attendance lists were incomplete, and one complaint supposedly filed against me was dated 3 days before the alleged incident even occurred. It was sloppy, but dangerous. Lies, once printed, grow roots. And then came the photos. Grainy, clearly edited shots of me yelling at a group of neighbors in the park. Only I'd never been there. Marcus zoomed in on the image. "They didn't even bother to match the lighting," he said bitterly. "This isn't just harassment anymore. It's criminal." He was right. Under state HOA law, falsifying official records constitutes fraud. If proven, it could lead to fines, or even jail time for those involved. But until we proved it, the smear campaign was working. My phone filled with anonymous texts and hateful comments. Some neighbors stopped looking at me entirely. Others glared as I drove by. That evening, a new HOA notice appeared online. My stomach turned as I read the headline. "Special vote scheduled. Potential sale of property at 1423 Waverly Court." They weren't just lying to ruin my name. They were planning to steal my home. Marcus looked up from his laptop, his jaw tightening. "They're trying to force you out before this hits court. We have to move fast." I nodded slowly, the reality sinking in like a knife to the gut. They thought they could erase me with paperwork and poison rumors. They had no idea who they were up against. "The court will now come to order. All rise." The bailiff's voice thundered through the courtroom. Every sound, every movement seemed amplified. The shuffle of chairs, the soft click of cameras, the low hum of whispers from the packed gallery. My knees wobbled as I stood, but I lifted my chin. I was terrified, but I was ready to fight. Judge Eleanor Brooks entered, her expression unreadable, her black robe sweeping behind her as she took her seat. The sight of her, calm, authoritative, gave me a small spark of courage. I glanced at the rows of faces, neighbors who once smiled at me now whispering to each other, reporters poised with notepads, and Rick Dunlap sitting smugly beside his attorney. His arms were crossed, his jaw set in that same arrogant smirk I'd seen too many times before. The proceedings began with Rick's testimony. He leaned toward the microphone, his voice dripping with fake civility. "There was never any racial motivation here," he said smoothly. "We simply enforce the rules equally. Miss Carter has been combative and unwilling to comply with basic community standards." I could feel my pulse in my temples. He was lying with the same ease he breathed. Marcus stood pacing slowly before the jury. "Mr. Dunlap," he began, voice calm but sharp. "Is this your email?" He held up a printed sheet, the one where Rick had written, "We can't let that house lower property values." Rick's smirk faltered for the first time. "That's taken out of context," he stammered. "Context?" Marcus shot back. "You called a family's home that house. You targeted them with fines no one else received. You manufactured violations, falsified minutes, and then tried to foreclose. Is that the context you meant?" The room went silent. Even the clicking of reporters' pens stopped. Marcus didn't stop there. He presented side-by-side photos, time-stamped, showing identical violations ignored for white neighbors. Then came the recordings, Rick's condescending tone, the veiled threats, the laughter from that HOA meeting. Each sound filled the courtroom with the truth I'd been living for months. When it was my turn to speak, my throat tightened. I told them everything, the fear, the nights I couldn't sleep, the moment I found the words "go back home" on my fence. My voice cracked, but I kept going. When I finished, Judge Brooks leaned forward, eyes locked on Rick. Her tone dropped, low and cold. "You think you're above the law, Mr. Dunlap?" Rick didn't answer. For the first time, he looked scared. "This court finds the HOA guilty of racial discrimination and malicious conduct." The words hit the air like a thunderclap. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The entire courtroom froze. No shuffling, no whispering, no sound at all. Judge Brooks continued, her voice firm and steady, every syllable carrying the weight of justice. "The Homeowners Association of Waverly Court is hereby ordered to pay compensatory and punitive damages to the plaintiff, Ms. Danielle Carter, for emotional distress and unlawful foreclosure attempts. Furthermore, Mr. Richard Dunlap is to be removed from his position as HOA president effective immediately." Rick's face drained of color. His attorney leaned toward him, whispering urgently, but Rick just stared ahead, motionless, as if the floor had given way beneath him. I sat there, numb, staring at the judge, trying to process the fact that I had actually won. Marcus put a hand on my shoulder. "You did it," he whispered. His voice cracked slightly, the first crack I'd heard from him since this began. A murmur spread through the courtroom, then applause. Not everyone clapped, but enough did to make the sound echo against the marble walls. A few people stood. Even Officer Hernandez, who had been sitting quietly near the back, gave a small nod. My chest tightened, and I felt the tears finally break free. Months of fear, anger, and humiliation poured out in that single moment. Rick stood slowly, his jaw trembling, and for the first time, he didn't have anything to say. He tried to look composed, but the silence around him made it worse. The man who once barked orders, who ruled the neighborhood with intimidation, now looked small, powerless. Judge Brooks finished with a final statement. "Let this be a reminder that no community, no institution is above the law. Discrimination has no place in this state or in this country." She slammed her gavel once, the sound sharp and final. Legal nugget. Under the Fair Housing Act, victims of housing discrimination can receive both compensatory and punitive damages, financial penalties designed to punish unlawful behavior and prevent it from happening again. As I stepped out of the courthouse, the world erupted. Microphones, flashes, cameras, reporters shouting my name. "Danielle, how does it feel to win? Do you think this will change HOA laws nationwide?" I blinked against the light, my heart still racing. For the first time in months, I didn't feel hunted. I felt heard. "We didn't mean it that way," my neighbor stammered, her hands trembling as she offered me a bouquet of flowers wrapped in shiny paper. The same woman who once crossed the street to avoid me now couldn't look me in the eye. Her voice was thin, nervous. We just didn't know what was really going on. I stared at the flowers for a long second before taking them, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to prove to myself that I could still accept peace after everything they'd done. Thank you, I said quietly, though my tone carried a weight she couldn't escape. She nodded quickly and walked off, her heels tapping faster than usual against the pavement. It had been 2 weeks since the verdict, but the ripples were still spreading through Waverly Court like a shock wave. The neighborhood that once felt hostile now buzzed with awkward energy. Rick Dunlap had resigned publicly. Well, forced out was more accurate, and the HOA board dissolved shortly after. The county had appointed a temporary administrator until a new election could be held. Every mailbox carried a notice about immediate leadership restructuring and bylaw reform. People who once smirked when I passed now muttered soft hellos, their smiles strained with guilt. Some even left small notes of apology in my mailbox, written in careful handwriting, as if politeness could rewrite history. But there were others, like Rick's closest allies, who couldn't bear the humiliation. Their for sale signs went up almost overnight. One morning, I watched a moving truck pull up to the Dunlap's house. Rick stood at the curb, his head down, barking short orders to the movers. He didn't look in my direction, but I did. For months, I'd wanted to scream at him, to demand an apology, to make him understand what he'd done. But when the moment finally came, all I felt was pity. He looked smaller now, powerless. The media coverage had made me something I never expected to be, a local symbol of resilience. Reporters called me the woman who stood up to her HOA. The county paper ran a headline that read, "Nurse wins landmark HOA discrimination case." Strangers sent letters of support. Someone even started an online fundraiser to help with my legal fees. I didn't ask for any of it, but I was grateful. Still, the real victory wasn't on paper or online. It was in my home. Maya was smiling again. For the first time in months, she wasn't afraid to walk to school alone. She started leaving her curtains open, her music playing softly while she studied. The silence that once haunted our nights had lifted. We could breathe again. One evening, as the sun set in a wash of orange and gold, I repainted the fence, the same fence that had once been scarred with hateful words. This time, Maya helped me. Together, we brushed smooth strokes of fresh white paint over every mark, every reminder of hate, until the wood looked new again. "It's like we're erasing them," she said, smiling. "Not erasing," I told her gently, "replacing." We sat on the porch afterward, watching the light fade. For the first time since moving here, I felt peace, real, deep peace. But just as I began to believe it was finally over, fate decided to remind me otherwise. The next morning, I opened my mailbox and froze. Inside was a single white envelope, no return address. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a handwritten note in careful cursive. "They're doing it to me too." It was signed, "Jennifer, Willow Creek HOA." My stomach sank. The battle I thought I'd ended was just beginning somewhere else. They tried to erase me, but I became the headline they'll never forget. The words slipped out as I stood on my front porch, a paintbrush in hand, watching sunlight dance across the fresh coat of color I'd just finished. The same color they once fined me for, deep, bold crimson. The same color they said didn't fit the community. Today, it shone brighter than ever, like a flag of defiance waving against their small-mindedness. It had been 3 months since the verdict, but the echoes of that courtroom day still hummed through my life. Every time I looked at the white fence, every time I saw Maya's laughter fill the yard again, I remembered what it cost to get here. The long nights of fear, the harassment, the notes, the humiliation. And yet, as painful as it all had been, I wouldn't have changed a thing. Because I didn't just win a case. I changed something deeper, something invisible but powerful. I changed what community meant in this place. Now every HOA meeting had new faces, diverse, fair, and determined to rebuild the neighborhood's trust. The bylaws had been rewritten too, with clearer language to prevent discrimination. The new board even invited me to speak at their first meeting as a guest of honor. I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to leave the past buried where it belonged. But then I remembered all those nights when I wished someone, anyone, had spoken up for me. So I went. Standing in that same community hall, under those same flickering lights, I told my story. Not as a victim, but as a survivor. I used to think silence was safety, I said to the small crowd. But silence just gives power to the ones who abuse it. You can't protect your peace by hiding from injustice. You protect it by confronting it. People clapped. Some cried. And for the first time I felt the weight of those words lift off my chest. Back home, life had settled into a rhythm again. Maya had joined a community art program, and every afternoon she'd paint in the yard with her friends. Laughter, the sound I'd missed most, filled our home again. Sometimes, when I caught her looking at the fence or the porch, she'd smile quietly and say, "We won, huh?" "We did," I'd answer, "and we'll keep winning." One weekend, I hosted a neighborhood cookout. A few old neighbors came, bringing food and awkward apologies, but many new families came too. Families who said they moved here because of what they'd seen in the news. "You made us believe we could live here without fear," one woman told me, her voice thick with emotion. That hit harder than any headline ever could. That night, after everyone left, I sat on the porch under the soft glow of the light, the crimson boards beneath my feet gleaming in the moonlight. I ran my hand along the railing and thought about every moment that brought me here. Every insult, every letter, every tear. All of it had built this moment of peace. I realized then that justice isn't just a word people write in verdicts or laws. It's something you feel. It's the calm that settles when the storm finally breaks. It's the silence that follows when truth finally speaks louder than hate. I took a slow breath, looked out at my street, and smiled. Justice, I whispered to myself, has a color, and it's mine. Viewer CTA, what would you do if your HOA targeted you? Tell your story below, and if this story hit you, if you've ever felt silenced, cornered, or judged, then like, subscribe, and share this video with someone else. You never know whose courage might be waiting for a spark. As I stood, ready to go inside, a faint breeze carried the sound of laughter from down the street. For the first time, it didn't feel like a reminder of who I wasn't. It felt like a song of who I'd become. Next time, you'll see what happened when an HOA tried to evict a veteran for flying his flag.